A white lion cub begged a wheelchair-bound man for help. What he did next shocked everyone. What would you do if a fragile, desperate creature appeared at your doorstep demanding a chance to live? The evening was quiet, the hum of the world outside fading with the setting sun. Inside a modest home, nestled at the edge of the wilderness, a man sat by the window, lost in thought. His hands resting on the armrests of his wheelchair, his eyes scanning the darkening landscape. Then a faint sound caught his attention, a soft, almost pleading noise, unlike anything he had heard before. At first he thought it was a trick of the wind, but then a pale shape materialized against the glass. A small lion cub, its coat almost glowing white, stood trembling at the window. The creature's eyes reflected a silent cry, a call not just for food or shelter, but for mercy. Its body bore signs of hardship, shaken and weak, far from the safety of the wild. For a moment the man hesitated. The wild was unforgiving, and this tiny lion seemed hopeless against the relentless cruelty of nature. Should he intervene and risk upsetting the delicate balance? Or should he close the window and turn away, as so many had before? His heart pounded with conflicting emotions, doubt wrestling with compassion. The cub's gaze never faltered. It was a plea unspoken, a last hope resting entirely in him. Outside, darkness deepened, shadows creeping slowly across the walls like a warning. He felt a rising sense of injustice, an unbearable weight pressing on his soul. How could he abandon this helpless soul to the unforgiving wilderness? As the man slowly reached out to unlock the window, a chill ran through the air, an unspoken promise that this night would change everything. But what dangers lay beyond the door? And who else was watching, waiting to decide the cub's fate? The answer would not come easy. The clatter of boots echoed across the gravel driveway, slicing through the evening's fragile calm. A tall figure in a neat uniform appeared at the wooden gate, his steps firm and unyielding. The night was settling in, but his rigid presence seemed to bring its own chill. This was Daniel Marsh, the animal control officer, a man known for his strict code and an uncompromising belief that wild creatures, no matter how fragile, belonged solely to the wild. If injured, they should survive, or not, without interference. Daniel's voice was sharp when he called out, "Open the door! Now!" His eyes scanned the window where the white lion cub still stood, its small form trembling. He carried an official air, a kind of authority that brooked no argument. Inside, the man in the wheelchair stirred. Hesitation clashed with determination as he moved slowly towards the door, unlocking it with gentle hands. Daniel stepped inside without waiting, his gaze fixed on the cub's fragile body. "You can't keep it," Daniel said firmly. "It doesn't stand a chance here. It needs to be returned to the wild or taken to official care. This isn't a pet." The man's eyes met Daniel's, steady and soft. "This little one needs more than the wild can give right now. It needs care." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I've seen what happens to animals weak enough to survive in captivity. You're holding on to false hope. Nature has its rules." But beneath his stern exterior was something else, a flicker of pain that no one saw. Daniel carried a burden too heavy for words. Years ago, a haunting memory gripped him, his younger brother, spirited and brave, attacked by a wild creature under tragic circumstances. The guilt lingered like a shadow he could never shake. That loss hardened his heart, made him believe that mercy was often just cruelty dressed up as kindness. His strictness was armor, shielding him from the vulnerability that compassion demanded. Helping vulnerable creatures felt like reopening a wound he had never truly healed. Watching the cub, Daniel's voice softened just a fraction. "I don't want you to get hurt. I want what's best for all of us." Yet his eyes betrayed a war raging inside. As the man studied Daniel's face, he sensed the buried pain behind the officer's cold resolve. Here was a man caught between past wounds and present fears, struggling with what it truly meant to protect. The room filled with a tense silence, neither willing to bend, though both silently aching for a solution. Outside, the wind whispered warnings, as if even nature itself waited for the answer neither man dared voice aloud. What was the right path for a fragile soul begging for life? The man in the wheelchair shifted slightly, the soft creak of his chair breaking the silence that had settled into the room. His name was Elias, a quiet figure shaped by years of patience and resilience. His hands trembled only a little as they rested on the armrests, the faint tremor a reminder of the accident that had confined him here. Yet his eyes were sharp, alight with a care that seemed to reach beyond his immediate surroundings. Elias lived in a small house nestled at the forest's edge, a humble sanctuary brimming with life, birds perched on windowsills, small injured mammals nestled in makeshift nests, and the soft murmur of nature blending seamlessly with the occasional call of wild creatures. This was his world of healing, a place where broken souls, animal or human, found shelter. Despite his physical limits, Elias had made it his mission to protect those who could not fend for themselves. A silent promise he renewed each day. He eyed the cub again, its fur stained and frail, as it trembled not just from injury, but from some unseen terror. Could he truly help this creature? His mind flicked through doubts. Did he have the strength left to care for something so vulnerable? Would nature's indifferent hand undo all his efforts? And what of Daniel, whose words echoed in his mind? Was it foolish to resist an authority that claimed to know what was best? The question gnawed at Elias. Was his compassion enough? Was love and care enough when the harsh world outside held no mercy? He had spent so long believing in kindness, but now, confronted with this tiny white lion cub, he felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down. Yet inside him stirred a determination he could not quash. Maybe, just maybe, this fragile life could be saved, not by ignoring nature's rules, but by bending them. That thought gave him a flicker of hope, even if the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with disagreement. Elias's home was quiet but alive, a fragile refuge in a world where rules were rigid and hearts often closed. Now it held a new question. Could a man in a chair and a frightened cub rewrite the rules of survival? Daniel's boots clicked sharply against the wooden floor as he stepped into the dimly lit living room, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the trembling white lion cub nestled near Elias's wheelchair. His face was stern, unwavering, a mask of duty carved by years on the job. As he stood over the fragile creature, his voice was firm but low, cutting through the heavy silence like a cautious wind. "You have to hand it over, Elias," Daniel said, his eyes locked on the cub. "It's too wild, too fragile to survive here. The sanctuary isn't equipped for a wild lion. This is nature's way. We can't interfere." Elias's hands tightened slightly on the armrests, a small but resolute gesture. The old familiar knot of defiance coiled inside him. "You think nature is kind, Daniel, that letting it suffer is just. There's no sanctuary in the wild for this little one. Not now." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're a kind man, Elias, but kindness isn't always enough. The wild has its own laws. The cub belongs in a place where it can be properly cared for, with professionals trained to handle this." The room hummed with tension. The cub, eyes blinking softly, seemed to sense the invisible battle raging around it. Elias leaned closer, his voice softer but no less firm. "And I don't trust you to be that professional. You see rules and control, but not love. I will care for this cub, here, where it is safe. And I ask you from one protector to another, please understand why." Daniel clenched his jaw, struggling against a storm beneath his surface. He looked away briefly, then back at Elias. "You're risking everything by keeping it. If something goes wrong, something could already be wrong." Elias's words were measured, weighted with truth. "You don't see the hope shining in those eyes, do you?" "I do." The two men stood there, a chasm of belief stretched between them. Neither wavered, yet beneath their resolve churned a fragile respect, born of shared care, despite the different paths they'd chosen. In that moment, the fragile cub was more than just an animal. It was the unspoken question binding them, a call to reconsider, to listen, and perhaps to begin to heal old wounds. Daniel's rigid stance softened ever so slightly as Elias's words settled in the heavy air. The cub's faint, uneven breaths echoed in the quiet room, a small but urgent reminder of the stakes between them. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel's gaze wavered, and his voice lost some of its usual sharpness. "I never told you why I'm so insistent about leaving nature to take its course," he began, hesitating, as if unburdening a secret long held in shadows. Elias, sensing the shift, encouraged him with a gentle nod, his eyes steady and patient. Daniel's shoulders slumped, the weight of years pressing on him visibly. "Years ago," he said slowly, "when I was younger, my sister went into the wild. She was fearless, just like you with this cub. But one day she was injured by an animal. Not badly, but enough that she couldn't call for help." His fingers clenched and unclenched, betraying a flicker of pain beneath his calm exterior. "The rescue came too late. I was the one to find her. I swore then I would never allow a wild creature to hurt anyone close to me again. That's why I've kept this distance. From animals, from their suffering. It's easier to let nature do what it will than to watch potential tragedy again." Elias listened with growing understanding, the hard line between them softening as the truth emerged. But questions stirred quietly in the back of both their minds. Was Daniel's fear truly just from the past, or was it a veil for something deeper, guilt, perhaps, or regret? Could his coldness be a shield rather than a simple belief? And did Elias's own compassion risk repeating the mistakes of the past, or could it forge a new way forward? For a long moment silence reigned, broken only by the cub's gentle whimper. Daniel's voice, now quieter, carried a trace of vulnerability. "What if I'm wrong? What if kindness, like you say, can change things? But what if love isn't enough? I can't risk another loss." Elias's response was steady, filled with quiet conviction. "We won't know until we try, Daniel. This cub's fight is our chance to heal, both of us. Will you stand with me?" The room seemed to breathe anew, with the fragility of their shared hope and the heavy weight of their doubts. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time they faced it together. Elias's heart thumped with a fierce determination. The white lion cub's fragile breath was a silent plea, echoing in the small room, filled with tense stillness. For days he had wrestled with the impossibility of the choice before him. Letting the cub return to the wild meant certain struggle, possibly survival, yes, but pain and loneliness too. Handing it over to animal control meant cold procedures, distance, and an uncertain fate. But now, standing face to face with Daniel, once his adversary, now something closer, he found a new resolve. "I will take care of him," Elias said, voice firm despite the uncertainty. "Not because I think I can fix everything, but because he deserves a chance, just like we do." Daniel's gaze fell to the floor, silent for a moment. His hands, rough and steady, trembled as he reached out, gently brushing a stray cloth closer to the cub's ribs. "You really think love can do what nature won't?" he murmured. Elias nodded, an unexpected fire lighting his tired eyes. "It's not just love, it's patience. It's fighting for hope when everything says to give up." The room seemed to lean in around them, shrinking until only the cub's soft mewl broke the heavy air. Daniel slowly exhaled, a tension slipping from his shoulders, a quiet act of surrender. "All right," he said, voice brittle but certain. "We'll try it your way." Together, they set up a small space by the window. Warm blankets, clean water, and soft food, simple things that felt monumental in the face of nature's harsh rules. Elias moved carefully, speaking softly to the cub, the sound almost a promise. Daniel watched, his skepticism mingling with a tentative hope, the first flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself in years. The cub stirred, eyes opening to slivers of light and unfamiliar hands. Elias's smile was slow, but real. Here, in this fragile sanctuary, their worlds had shifted, not away from pain or risk, but towards something stronger. Compassion done with courage, a choice to heal beyond fear. The night deepened, but the white lion cub's gentle breaths softened the shadows between them. They had made a choice, and sometimes that's the first step towards saving not just a life, but two. The sky darkened suddenly, the sharp whistle of wind threading through the trees. Elias glanced at the window, seeing the earliest drops of rain blur the landscape outside. The storm was coming fast, stronger than he'd expected. Daniel stood beside him, the weight of the looming tempest pressing on both of them silently. "We need to protect the cub," Elias said, urgency rising in his voice. "And the others. They won't last out there." Daniel nodded, eyes scanning the small sanctuary cluttered with cages, blankets, and bowls of water. "I'll clear the outside enclosures," he said briskly. "Make sure everything's secured." Together, they moved with purpose. With Daniel pushing his way expertly through the narrow paths Elias could only watch and call instructions from his chair, the two men coordinated like an unlikely team, bound by necessity. They banged down loose boards, reinforced gates with heavy stones, and brought smaller creatures inside one by one. Inside, Elias prepared a warm corner near the window where the white cub rested. His fingers trembled, but he refused to let his doubt show. He arranged the blankets carefully, tucked the cub in with gentle hands, whispering soothing words he hoped would ease the animal's anxiety. Outside, the wind picked up, howling against the house, rattling old panes. Rain lashed the roof with increasing force. Minutes stretched as the storm bore down, the power flickering and then going out. Darkness settled heavily in the room. Save for the faint glow from the street lamp outside, Elias felt the cub's shallow breaths against his palm, a fragile lifeline. Daniel came back inside, soaked but steady. "We're secure," he reported, his voice low and steady in the dark. "No damage so far. How's the cub?" Elias smiled faintly, holding on. The two men sat side by side, nothing more than shadows and quiet breathing between them. The storm roared around their fragile, safe haven, but inside, a fragile trust had begun to take root. Then, amidst the thunder's rumble, Daniel broke the silence, voice rough but certain. "You were right. This changes things." Elias met his gaze, sensing not just agreement, but something deeper, a new bond forged in the eye of the storm. Outside, the tempest showed no sign of relenting. Inside, hope had just begun to grow. The storm raged on outside, relentless and unforgiving, but inside the small sanctuary, a quieter storm was brewing, one of shifting emotions and fragile revelations. Daniel crouched beside the white lion cub, carefully adjusting the blankets around it. His movements were slower now, softer, as if the fierce officer was shedding a layer of his hardened exterior with every touch. Elias watched him, his heart pounding, not just from the thunder, but from the growing sense of connection forming between them. Daniel's voice was almost a whisper. "I never thought I'd be here like this, helping." He looked away, his jaw tight. "For so long I believed animals were better off left to fend for themselves. No interference, natural order." Elias nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. "That order doesn't always feel natural when you see them suffer." Daniel's eyes met his, unsure and raw. "You don't know what it's like, losing someone because of an animal. My brother, I was too young to understand, but the fear, the guilt." His hands clenched. "I shut it all down. Maybe too hard." The silence between them grew heavy, filled with unsaid things. Elias hesitated. "Do you think it's wrong to care?" Daniel's gaze dropped to the cub, now resting peacefully but still fragile. "I don't know anymore. Maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's necessary." Elias reached out, hesitantly placing a hand on Daniel's arm. "We're both trying to protect something. Maybe together we can learn how." For the first time, Daniel didn't pull away. Instead, he exhaled, a breath heavy with relief and uncertainty. "I want to try." But beneath that fragile truce lingered doubt. Would this fragile bond hold once the storm passed? Could years of fear and pain really be unraveling in a night? Elias caught himself wondering if his own faith was enough to heal what Daniel's heart had long buried. The darkness outside pressed close, but inside, a cautious hope began to bloom, fragile and trembling, yet fiercely determined. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a sky painted with soft, tentative hues of dawn. The once fierce wind had quieted to a gentle whisper, and the sanctuary stood like a small island of calm in the world's sudden stillness. Inside, the air felt lighter, as if the heavy tension that had hung over the room all night was slowly lifting. The white lion cub, its breathing steady and calm, lay nestled in blankets that radiated warmth and care. It had survived. It had grown stronger. And with every small movement the cub made, a tiny thread of hope wove itself into the lives of the two men who had stood on opposite sides of so many divides just hours before. The man in the wheelchair sat close by, his eyes bright with a quiet pride. His hands trembled a little as they brushed a stray fold of the cub's soft fur, but his heart was steady. Watching the cub rest peacefully, he felt a sense of victory that went far beyond survival. It was a victory of compassion over fear, patience over pain. He glanced across the room to the animal control officer, whose stiff posture had softened overnight into something almost hopeful. The officer's gaze no longer bore the hardness of someone who ruled through rules alone. Instead, it carried a fragile warmth, a silent admission of change. They shared a look that said more than words ever could. This was no longer about stubborn beliefs or age-old pain. It was about a shared mission, one born from the terrible and the tender alike. The man spoke first. "It's not just about saving one life." "No," the officer agreed, voice low but firm. "It's about giving them a chance, all of them." Their partnership was tentative, like the first steps of the cub after a long rest. Yet it was real. Together, they began planning how to care for the sanctuary's injured animals, combining knowledge and care in ways neither had thought possible before. The officer's precise discipline found a new softness in the man's patient empathy, and the man's gentle care gained strength from the officer's willingness to protect, not just enforce. In those quiet hours after the storm, the sanctuary became a place not only of recovery for wildlife, but of healing for two fractured souls. Each day, the cub grew stronger, a living symbol of their joint effort, a beacon of shared hope and new beginnings. The man in the chair found small signs of strength returning in his own legs, a hopeful echo of the cub's steady progress. Through trust, kindness, and the willingness to see beyond old pain, the two men discovered something deeper. Healing, they realized, was never just about the body or the wild. It was about opening hearts and standing together, even when life seemed impossible to face alone. Days melted into weeks, and the sanctuary thrived as a quiet testament to transformation. The lion cub grew strong under the watchful eyes of the man in the wheelchair and the once stern animal control officer. More than physical strength, it was the unseen growth between the two men that became the true miracle. The man, once resigned to a life limited by his injury, now found flickers of renewed hope in his legs, small but steady signs that healing was possible. With each tentative movement, he felt the powerful truth that the body could mend when the heart was willing to let go of fear. The officer, too, changed in ways neither had expected. The rigid walls he had built around himself cracked and crumbled as he learned to face buried pain with compassion rather than denial. His harsh judgment of nature's cruelty softened into a deep respect for every injured life, wild or human. Slowly, he became more than a mere enforcer of rules. He became a protector driven by understanding. Their shared journey taught them that healing is never linear or simple. It is messy, slow, and deeply human. The sanctuary, once just a refuge for animals, became a sanctuary for two broken souls who dared to trust, forgive, and love again. The cub's steady purrs filled the rooms with hope, a soft melody echoing the quiet triumph of kindness over despair. In this unlikely partnership, both men found their redemption. Not through grand gestures or miracles, but through everyday acts of tenderness and courage. They realized that no matter the wounds life inflicted, the power to heal lay within their hands and hearts, intertwined in faith and friendship. The story closes not with a perfect ending, but with a promise. Healing, connection, and love are possible, even when the road is hardest to travel. If this story touched you, share in the comments which moment moved you most. What lesson do you think shines brightest here? Subscribe to the channel. Your presence makes every story worthwhile. The next story could touch your heart even more.